An investigation dismisses allegations that Donald Trump colluded with Russia in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The report was highly critical of the FBI. And one other development we're following, the U.S. debt ceiling talks continue as the Biden administration expresses deep concerns over a possible default. I'm Anand Naidu. This is The Heat. On Monday, Special Counsel John Durham released a 306-page report. It concluded that the then presidential candidate, Donald Trump, did not conspire with the Kremlin to win the 2016 presidential election. Durham said the FBI reacted hastily to conduct an investigation without sufficient evidence. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden met with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Tuesday after a month of stalled negotiations on the debt ceiling talks. Biden had this to say earlier.
We pay our bills. The nation has never defaulted on its debt, and it never will. And we're going to continue these discussions with congressional leaders in the coming days until we reach an agreement, and I'll have more to say about that on Sunday.
Lots to discuss. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Gene Rossi is a former assistant U.S. attorney and federal prosecutor. From Miami, Florida, Jaden Horan is the editor-in-chief of Soigné. Also in the U.S. Capitol, Jackie Luqman is the co-host of By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, and Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. Welcome to all of you. Adolfo, let me start with you. So the Durham report is out, 4 years in the making. We know what the report says. It was very critical of the FBI. In fact, the prosecutor, John Durham, who conducted this investigation, says neither the intelligence services nor the police had evidence to pursue an extensive investigation into allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Yet the FBI did, in fact, launch an investigation. It was called Operation Crossfire Hurricane. So what were your main takeaways from this report?
Well, let me say at the beginning, since Anand, you know I've criticized this program sometimes with an editorial bent, and it's what it stresses. I commend you beginning the program on this subject, something largely ignored by the American media that is absolutely in the tank for President Biden. I think the words are key: raw, unanalyzed, and uncorroborated. That was the key takeaway. I really commend anyone. I don't know how many people have read the 306-page report and the footnotes. It's a scathing indictment of an investigation that never should have taken place. But there are a couple of key takeaways on this. It confirms that the Steele, which we know the Steele dossier, was a political dirty trick by the Clinton campaign that was already discredited by the FBI when this investigation was being conducted. So it should never have taken place in the first instance. Secondly, we know that John Brennan and the Obama administration at the tail end were made aware that the Clinton campaign was trying to tie, without any evidence whatsoever, and paying for, there was a collusion with the Russians, a dossier to discredit President Trump without any evidence, to take away attention from her email scandal. So when you look at the totality of the report, it is scathing. The FBI statement is now, we recognize errors and they've been corrected. Attorney General Merrick Garland has not issued any statement whatsoever. He just released the report. You can imagine, and this had been the other party, they would be making political hay on television in the United States day in and day out. What is clear is what President Trump said from the beginning. This was a political hit job from the beginning that was a cloud over his presidency for 3 years. Remember the Mueller report? That was supposed to have all this collusion and all this investigation and the conclusion and tens of millions of dollars. At the end of the day, we know it was the other side that was colluding, and the other side that was trying to discredit President Trump and using the mechanisms of government in the most undemocratic way that shattered every norm of the Department of Justice. It's a shocking example of the real disinformation that is taking place in America.
All right, Adolfo, you say shocking, you call it a scathing indictment, etc., but no laws were broken, were they? Nobody's been prosecuted, nobody's been charged. I mean, at worst, we can say that the FBI behaved badly, they didn't do their job properly.
Well, that's correct. I mean, there's no law for unethical and incompetence. There's no question of that. Although often on some charges against Trump officials and President Trump, they try to use those standards. But the fact of the matter is, the FBI has recognized that there were grave mistakes that were made here. There was a political motivation that was at stake here. You have to remember quickly that Mr. Comey in October said nobody in their right mind would launch an investigation with evidence against Hillary Clinton's emails and her breaking of the law, his words. But in this case, without any evidence whatsoever, and once it was established that there was this Steele dossier was bogus and a Clinton operation, the investigation continued.
Gene, great to have you with us on the show. Let's get your view on this. Let's talk about what the FBI, or at least what Durham said about the FBI in that report. He said the FBI failed to uphold their mission of strict fidelity to the law in connection with certain events and activities described in this report. We also know that the FBI offered Christopher Steele, that's the former British intelligence agent, $1 million to prove what was in his report. He wasn't able to do so. So what do you make of the report?
Well, I commend Adolfo Franco. He does a great job as a political strategist. But for 30 years, I tried more cases than anybody in the history of the Justice Department. And I can say this. What John Durham did with his report, there are good parts of it that I agree that the FBI mishandled the preliminary process for opening an investigation. And you hit on a key word. Did they have enough basis to open an extensive investigation? That's debatable based on this report by Mr. Durham, that I have to say looks at the glass as always half empty or half full, depending on his view. But I will say this, James Comey, who was not interviewed by Durham, that's in a footnote, he was not interviewed, was a Republican appointee, the Deputy Attorney General under Bush. He was an assistant, he was a U.S. attorney under Bush. I would not say he was a political hack after Donald Trump. And anybody who thinks that the 2 letters that he issued within the 10 days before the November 2016 election helped Hillary Clinton, they need to take a reality check. Those 2 letters, one could argue, tubed her presidency. So John Durham, to me, has done a good job of interviewing a lot of people. He interviewed 425 people.
Right.
My problem is this. He had a confirmation bias, just like he had when he investigated the CIA destruction of tapes and other things under the Bush administration. And here's the Achilles heel of John Durham.
Yeah.
He takes the view of the person who assigns him the task. And Trump and Barr assigned him a mission. And in 2006 or the 2000s, he was assigned a mission and he had confirmation bias. And as a former prosecutor for 30 years, I see this in his report.
Gene, let's talk about how the FBI behaved in this. As Adolfo pointed out a moment ago, there are no laws against bad ethics or anything like that, but there is a perception that there was bias in the way that the FBI acted, bias against Donald Trump. Isn't that a problem?
I disagree with you that he concluded that. If you read this report fairly, there's a conclusion there was no conspiracy, political conspiracy to go after Trump. What Mr. Durham is complaining about is the evidence presented to them was not enough to open an extensive investigation. And I agree with Durham that when they went to the FISA court to get search warrants for Carter Page, that's his, that was a minimalist approach.
Yeah, Gene, just a moment. I am saying political bias because there were some texts that were produced during the previous investigation, actually. One of those texts was from the head of the FBI's counterintelligence division, Peter Strzok. He received a text, actually, from an FBI lawyer, and that FBI lawyer said, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? And he responded, no, he won't. We'll stop it.
Let me tell you this. I got a lot of emails when politics was being discussed in the offices of the 94 U.S. attorneys' offices. And you will find many emails where a prosecutor opines about a political candidate or a political view.
Right.
I can't even repeat them. So did Lisa Page and Mr. Strzok, who had a, let's say, unprofessional relationship, exchange an email? Yes. Did they make it clear they don't like Donald Trump? Yes. But you have to go a step further
Right.
and say, was the entire investigation the fruit, if you will, of those two emails? And this report doesn't say that.
Okay. Jayden, at the end of this investigation, now the release of the report, no one has been prosecuted, no one has been charged. In fact, Durham criticizes the FBI, but also says he found no prosecutable offenses. There's no evidence of a deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump, and there is nothing of what Trump called the crime of the century. What do you make of it?
Well, the crime of the century is accusing Donald Trump of collusion with a foreign actor. I mean, that was the crime of the century. And so for Donald Trump and for Republicans, what they're saying is that they're vindicated because in point of fact, there was no collusion. And we all know that there is interference. There's interference by state and non-state actors in every election. And our intelligence agencies and our media should be prepared for such things and be on guard for disinformation, whether it comes from internal sources or external sources. But when we look at this, I mean, again, we go to the point that that Attorney Rossi said is that unfortunately, unethical behavior is not the same as a standard for prosecution. And political bias is not something in general. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but looking at when people execute their jobs, it is certainly unprofessional. It's certainly undesirable. It certainly is something you can remove someone for their job, but can you prosecute them for what they're doing? Now, there is an open question in my mind ascertaining whether or not the FBI, in directly lying to a federal court, knowing that the evidence or origin of their evidence is incorrect, in saying it's mislabeling or they mishandled it, however they minimize that action, we know that the U.S. law enforcement agencies can bring down the full force on someone else if they believe that in filling out a form, they did it with intent to defraud the government or to lie.
Right,
So
Jayden,
they
when
should
you say the FBI lied to the federal court, are you talking about the applications they made to the FISA court?
Yes, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So my point is that the same standard should apply, that we apply to, defendants that federal prosecutors want to bring, where they bring the full force of the federal government and assume that someone's intent was bad, and then allow, the presumption once they're in the court system to be innocent until proven guilty. But again, that standard doesn't apply when the government investigates itself. And of course, that's the problem. So will they find evidence to prosecute? Well, that would require there to be a crime. Being unethical is not necessarily criminal, but political bias, unlike what the previous panelist said, in fact, in point of fact, does matter for the American people in understanding the origin for an investigation. If someone believes that they do not like a candidate and they do not like a political individual and they are jobbed or tasked to investigate them, then we have to question motivation in how they pursue and introduce evidence.
Okay. Gina, I know you want to say something very quickly because I want to get to Jackie.
Oh, I want to compliment Attorney General Merrick Garland. And 2 times in the executive summary, John Durham makes the following statement, that at no time did Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, put his thumb on the scale and try to limit his investigation. And that says a lot about Merrick Garland. He didn't try to shut him down. He didn't put a timeline on it. He let him finish his report, and even John Durham in his report praised him for it. So that's something to say about the Attorney General of the United States.
And Gene, it's something to say that he has no comment on a report of this significance, which again, in my mind, is a recognition that this is politically motivated from day one.
All right.
This was a hoax, and he knows it.
All right, Jackie, great to have you with us on the show. Jackie, if we could just try to take party politics out of this. Let's take the sort of Republican versus Democrat competition out of this, red versus blue, liberal versus conservative, etc. But if you look as objectively as you can at the behavior of what is supposed to be an apolitical bureaucracy, in this instance, part of the security bureaucracy, the FBI, and the way it had behaved, what conclusions do you come to?
Well, I can't, first of all, look at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in an maybe not in an apolitical lens, but certainly I can't look at them outside of the lens of the very troubled history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have to remember this is the same agency within and also the Department of Justice that has time and time again throughout history subverted and violated the rights, the so-called civil liberties that alleged American citizens are supposed to have whenever we were engaged in activities that they considered quote unquote un-American. Remember, this is the same agency that drove actress Jean Seberg to suicide because of her support of the Black Panther Party. This is the same agency that cooked up a false mail plot to destroy the United Negro Improvement Association and deport Marcus Garvey, that sent fake suicide letters or letters suggesting that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. should commit suicide, spied on him, spied on the Black Panther Party, Black radical civil rights, anti-war student movements, anti-climate advocates, indigenous rights groups. This is the agency that instigated the siege against the French Davidian compound.
Okay, Jackie, are you saying that legacy of the FBI was present in this investigation, that they acted in a similar way, and how so?
Because that legacy of the FBI and certainly of the United States in general has never been addressed, really truly acknowledged and resolved. Absolutely. The FBI is not an apolitical organization. There is no agency or institution within the U.S. government that is apolitical. Certainly not a law enforcement agency. Absolutely not.
But Jackie is spot on this. Even irrespective of your politics, and Gene's confirmed it. You have people who are supposedly, there's always this. I've been in Washington 40 years, Gene. I haven't tried as many cases as you've tried, but I run around the bureaucracy. Jackie's absolutely right, and you confirmed it with, well, they're expressing their political views. They're expressing their political views, and they're making decisions about investigations. Therefore, their judgment is clouded. This idea that these government employees in Washington, D.C. that vote 94% for Democrats are somehow independent and they put this in check. Jackie's absolutely right. There's a political bias. And this is a confirmation in this report of that bias. That is exactly what happened here.
Yeah, Adolfo, the Durham investigation was one of several. There was an earlier investigation which was carried out by the Justice Department's Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, and that investigation came to the conclusion that the FBI's actions were not politically motivated.
Well, but it came to the conclusion, two things, that his authority is limited as an inspector general, unlike a special counsel. So his authority of what he can investigate and the issues are limited. What he concluded is all kinds of failures and, frankly, misrepresentations and lack of cooperation in FISA pleadings. So there was, what does this say? It's Jackie's point. There was a hurry and a demand and a political motivation to move forward on this case. And lastly, I want Gene to comment on this. Once the evidence was clear, this lasted for 3 years, this investigation should have been turned off, and it wasn't turned off.
Okay. Gene, what we're hearing here is that there's a certain culture within the FBI that is inherently biased.
I got to tell you, I'm not saying the United States Department of Justice or the FBI is perfect. You go back to the Palmer raids in 1920. You go back to Korematsu under Attorney General Jackson, where they rounded up the Japanese. I get it. Hoover was spying on Martin Luther King. But there's no way you read this report, or you read the Mueller report, you read the Inspector General's report, or the bipartisan Senate Select Committee. There's no way you can say that there was a conspiracy, a deep state political conspiracy to go after Donald Trump. And the two torpedoes into that conspiracy, if it were a boat, were the two letters that Comey issued in the 10 days before the election. You just can't say that. I will say this. If Gene Rossi were head of that investigation, I would not have gone after probably the affidavits for Carter Page to get a search warrant. I would not have allowed an attorney to falsify an email. I would not have allowed uncorroborated allegations to rise to enough to open an extensive
Yes, the other thing,
investigation.
yeah.
Gene's confirming it now. He's confirming his own point. I believe you, Gene. You wouldn't have allowed it, but it was allowed because people had a political motivation. They're just so clear on this. Their emails you yourself refer. These people have a political motivation. You have Mr. Clapper without any Mr. Clapper, who is the head of the CIA, referring to Donald Trump as an asset of the Russians.
Yeah.
That is completely, of course, this influences the bureaucracy that's already left-leaning.
Gene, just one point here, Gene. So much of this crosses the line between politics and what should be an independent investigation. We heard repeatedly from one of the Democrat Party leaders, Adam Schiff, saying that he had incontrovertible evidence that there was collusion. Where is all that evidence?
Okay, what I'd like you to do is bring out the Mueller report again. Mm-hmm. And volume 1 said there was no conspiracy. There was no collusion. But Adolfo, since you've tried cases, there's something called aiding and abetting. In volume 1, there's a significant amount of aiding and abetting. Trump's own campaign staff and his family met with Russian officials in June of 2016, the purpose of which is to get dirt. That's not a coincidence. Paul Manafort was convicted. His trial came out that he had contacts with the Russians and he was a conduit to the campaign.
All right.
There was a 32-page.
I want to. Okay.
But just a minute.
Okay.
Where is the Steele report?
Sorry, Jackie. Go ahead. Jackie wants to say something. Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to raise this point because this is an argument between the two, I guess, representatives or members of either part of the ruling party. Listen, if we're going to talk about collusion to interfere in this country's election, when are we going to talk about the fact that the entire idea of Russia interfering in the election and causing Hillary Clinton to lose to Donald Trump came from the Clinton campaign itself. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board finally had to admit that in May of last year, that Hillary Clinton started this allegation, gave it to the media and the FBI, and they ran with it without any information. But if we're going to talk about a country colluding in an election, when are we going to talk about the way the United States government either foments coups in other countries to prop up leaders that they want, or specifically in the case of Russia, literally sent an entire campaign of people to Russia to manage the re-election campaign of a politician in Russia that the Russian people did not want.
All right.
So we're going to talk about prosecutable offenses of foreign actors interfering in other countries' democratic elections. Let's start right here.
Okay.
Yeah, Jack, where's the investigation of Hillary Clinton's collusion?
Yeah, okay.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, let me go to Jaden Horan and get his view on what we've just heard. Jaden, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, panelists raise a really important point that the FBI has been continually weaponized against the American people pretty much from its inception. We talked about the ones in the past, and then we talk about what happened to Trump. And what we're not talking about is the weaponization of the FBI against Orthodox Catholics, against school board parents. So this is continuing, and it just goes to show that the party in power has the ability to pull levers when it comes to the FBI. And so while one panelist wants to dance on the word of saying whether or not there's a vast conspiracy or a conspiracy within the FBI, it's not about a conspiracy. It's about a culture of weaponization within the FBI against any perceived threat to authority within the government. And that may be the Black Panthers, that may be Japanese Americans, or that may be currently Orthodox Catholics. It may have been previously Muslims. It might be school board parents. Whatever it is, we can expect that the FBI, rather than legitimately looking for threats, is instead weaponizing against the American people. And we're going to sit here and defend it like we did during the Trump investigation, saying that it's this paragon of law enforcement and that we should trust it.
Gene, you were saying a moment ago, you were talking about the contacts between Trump, the family, the campaign, and the Russians. So would it be fair for me to presume that this report is not going to put to rest these allegations which we've been hearing for several years about collusion?
No, this report is not the last word on this. But I got to say this. Rod Rosenstein, approved an indictment of 32 defendants, all Russians, that were interfering in an election. And this is indisputable. We can talk about whether they should have gone after Hillary more, whether the emails should have been charged, whether Trump was unfairly investigated. But this is a fact. Putin wanted to interfere in the election. This report does not refute that. That is a fact. That is a fact.
Okay, Jackie, I want to ask you about something else which we haven't talked about, and that is the role, I mean, you're a journalist yourself, the role that the media in the United States played in this investigation. I mean, the media did tell us over and over again, repeatedly, that there was evidence of collusion. In fact, the New York Times and the Washington Post received Pulitzers for their work.
These are the same media outlets that between 2014 and maybe 2018-19 reported accurately the rise of neo-Nazis in Ukraine after the 2014 coup, but all of a sudden now they say there are no neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So yes, we should absolutely believe them. You know, the people who were charged with collusion or interfering in U.S. elections, they were a part of an agency that created Facebook and social media ads for shoes and clickbait ads. And the political content that was shown, that was conveyed in these media outlets that was supposed to prove that these people were influencing or interfering the election, study after study has shown that they did not share information that people who already had a political bias didn't already know. They did not share information on these social media outlets, this internet research agency, when that information was political, and not a lot of it was. It wasn't any new information. It was pushed through the algorithm to people who already had one political bias or the other, and most of the content was ad content. But that's not what the U.S. media has been saying about what that agency and those people were doing. So, yeah, did they violate some FARA law, foreign agency, foreign agent, registrant? Maybe.
All right,
but
I'm afraid
collusion to influence an election on social media?
Jackie, I'm afraid I'm going to have to end it there. We have run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.